Hi, I'm Raymond Chiu. Here today we have Michael O to kickstart our series Favorite Verses. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm reading from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 8. The subtitle here says, Remember the Lord your God. Verse 1 The whole commandment that I command you today, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers. And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. And he humbled you, let you hunger, and fed you with manna, which you did not know. Nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Your clothing did not wear out, on your foot did not swell these 40 years. Know that in your heart that as a man disciplines his own son, the Lord your God disciplines you. So you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and by fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks, of water, of fountains and springs, flowing out in the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. And you shall eat and be filled, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Take care, lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his rules and his statutes, which I command you today. Lest when you have eaten and are full, and have built fine houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply, and your silver and gold is multiplied, then all that you have is multiplied. Then your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who led you through the great and terrifying wilderness, with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground, and where there was no water, who brought you water out of the flinty rock, who fled you in the wilderness with manna that your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and test you to do you good in the end. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. So you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, and he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers as it is this day. And if you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you shall surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so shall you perish, because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. That's chapter 8 in the book of Deuteronomy. Okay.
Thank you, Michael, for the reading. And could you tell us what do you feel about this chapter that you have chosen?
Mhm. The first time I think I read this chapter, this verse, was obviously the book of Moses, taking the people out of Egypt into the promised land. But what struck me was the few verses that tells me to remember the Lord and not to forget. It also tells me that why do we forget, and how at times that we seem to neglect that God brought us out into, and after a while we tend to forget. There's this verse about when we have built our fine houses, when we have married, have children, and we have so-called prospered, and those things that seem to have blessed us are now the exact things that are hindering us from having this relationship with God. So I was got a bit troubled. So does it mean that we do not get a chance to enjoy the fruits of our labor? Or is man always like that? Do we forget our parents? Do we forget our teachers? Do we forget our mentors? And once we have passed that path, we seem to remember, or we seem to forget that once upon a time, somebody led me through. Somebody brought me from one place to another place. And I felt that now that I had children, sometimes I feel that my children are treating me in the same way. When they had a need, they came to me. Now they have passed the need, they tend to have forgotten that they actually had parents with them. I've been to a few funerals, and I've heard a few eulogies, and I've heard a few obituaries. Also, I tend to think that, yeah, there was a good man, there was a good woman. And what do they remember of us? Yeah? So when the time comes, when I think about God and reflect about God, have I been guilty of forgetting about God's goodness upon my life every now and then? So I'm just here to remind every one of us that every day we look every day we hear, every day we feel. I think God is around us and God's goodness surrounds us. In fact, the song says God's goodness pursues us, which I feel it is true. It says we tend not to focus on that and we tend to give glory, give thanks to our intelligence, to our cleverness, to our ingenuity, to our networking,
Oh.
to our friends. So it comes to a point in time when he says God is good to have, but not important. Nice to know, but not the most important person to know. So I would think that for all of us to be reminded that actually God is in our midst and God is always looking after us, looking over us, and looking ahead of us. So with that in mind, I think we need to give thanks to God and be aware that whoever we are with, whatever day, whatever season it is, it's good to look upon those days when we were lacking and God filled. And as God filled, we need to once in a while remind ourselves that keep focused that God is still there. There are greater things to come. God has prepared us for a greater work, a greater days ahead. And I'm looking forward to those days, but I cannot forget that I come to this position because of what He has done for me in the past. So very simply saying that I've arrived at a certain point in life and I'm looking forward to the next thing. And the next thing requires me to look back and reflect back and acknowledge that God was with me. So I hope that encourages you. And that reminds you also, because there's the other part of forgetting God. If you forget God, God says that you will perish. And I get very worried. If we don't look at God for strength and for wisdom, we will actually look elsewhere. You ask yourself and see, we will look for men, we will look for power, we will look for politicians, we will look for wisdom, all over the place except for the Bible. That is when God says that, not that say God will punish us. He says because we neglect to acknowledge God, then we look at other places for sources of so-called helper. Those places might not be the best places.
They could be inferior sources.
Okay, and they might lead us to instructions.
Yes.
We don't want to go details, but where we go for help, just be careful. I would still suggest just remember that the Lord is always there. The Lord loves us. The Lord is prepared for us in that future. We should pursue that in His light.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Hey, thank you so much. It's a wonderful lesson for a 6-month-old Christian like me. Thank you very much. I hope we can listen to your next interpretation with your next favorite verse.